Okay, so let's get started. We are about to begin chapter 8, 1 Kings chapter 8. And, we spent the last few weeks discussing some of the details of the building of the temple. And now the temple is done. And we now in chapter 8, we are seeing there's going to be a very long prayer. But before that, we have some of the ceremony that goes into the dedication of this temple. So let's take a look. Chapter 8, verse 1. Then Solomon convoked the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the ancestral chieftains of the Israelites, before King Solomon in Jerusalem to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from the city of David, that is Zion. So first of all, one of the things we had pointed out before, the temple is on the Temple Mount, of course, okay? And you can picture it today, for those of you who've been to Jerusalem, city of David is located as you go out. Let's say you're at the western wall. Behind the wall is the Temple Mount. Above it, okay. And then if you go out that gate that's right by the western wall, and you cross the road, and then from there you would go downhill into what is literally called City of David today. There's amazing archaeological ruins there, and you can get guided tours. And if you literally could go every 6 months, and you're always going to find something new. It's just amazing what's going on there. But that's where City of David is. So it's down below. It's quite low, based, compared to the Temple Mount. So when they're saying they're going to bring up the ark, literally, it's an ascent from the city of David, which is where the ark has been sitting since David brought it. Now, you remember we did this in 2 Samuel, where the ark had been for 20 years in Kiryat Yearim, ever since the tabernacle was destroyed. And then David brings it up, and he actually brings it up twice. There, the first time, he makes a whole big celebration with lots of instruments and music. And it's not just a very regal kind of affair, but it's very bombastic. A lot of music, a lot of ceremony, a lot of pomp and circumstance. And then things go wrong. And the second time, when he succeeds, he actually realizes this is supposed to be a more modest ceremony. This is not a time for the king to say, I'm the king and I'm bringing up the ark, but rather it needs to be a much more modest ceremony. And David himself wears simple clothing and very simple instruments. We have a trumpet, we have the shofar, not anything exciting. It's much more intimate. It's much more personal in the way he's bringing the ark to the city of David. So now we have the next stage, which is, of course, a whole different ball game, because the temple is now a permanent temple. Mm-hmm. And it's in its permanent place. And so the ark is going to be brought up, and we will see that it is going to be a completely different kind of ceremony. So first of all, one of the things we're seeing is it's a massive ceremony in the sense that everyone's invited. We have all the heads of the tribes, we have all the important people, and we have everybody essentially, okay? And they're all gathering together to be part of this, okay? Verse 2, all the men of Israel gathered before King Solomon at the feast in the month of Etanim, that is the 7th month. So we have here not just all the leaders, but here in verse 2, we have all the men of Israel. You could also say all the people of Israel. I'm not sure that this is just men, okay? And it is during the feast of the 7th month. Now, the feast of the 7th month, the first day of the 7th month is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Right. And so this is probably when it took place. When all the elders of Israel had come, the priests lifted the ark and carried up the ark of the Lord. Then the priests and the Levites brought the tent of meeting and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. Now, we had discussed before exactly what this tent is. It is the tent that David had built when he brought the ark up. He put it near his palace or wherever in the city of David, and he built a tent around that ark. This is not the same tent that Moses had. However, we will see that the vessels are the same. When it says the tent of meeting and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. Meanwhile, King Solomon, the whole community of Israel who were assembled with him before the ark, were sacrificing sheep and oxen in such abundance that they could not be numbered or counted. So we see here is a completely different feel. This is not the regal procession that was David's first attempt. This is not the small, private, modest, we have here a king, King Solomon. He's there in all his glory. And they are sacrificing. So it's certainly very much a religious festival. They're sacrificing a ton. Okay. But you don't have that same kind of regal element. You don't have a discussion of his clothes, King Solomon. So it's definitely a public ceremony. It's a huge ceremony, but it's less regal, it's less personal, it's more religious, it's more spiritual. Okay. And that I think we see from everybody's gathering, and it's also more national. It's a national ceremony, and the sacrifices bring in the religious ceremony as well. And of course, we have the priests. Now, the priests brought the Ark of the Lord's Covenant to its place underneath the wings of the cherubim in the shrine of the house in the Holy of Holies. For the cherubim had their wings spread out over the place of the ark so that the cherubim shielded the ark and its poles from above. And we also discussed this as opposed to the tabernacle. In the temple, they had these huge cherubim, okay, floor to ceiling and from one side to the other. So they have this huge wingspan, which creates some sort of a canopy of sorts, okay, from one end of the Holy of Holies to the other end and up above, okay? And so this ark comes in underneath it. And as we know, this ark is the original ark that Moses made. And so that ark has its own set of cherubim, very small cherubim, on top of the box, on top of the ark itself. So we have this ark with the cherubim going in under these huge cherubim that are in the temple and that are a permanent fixture in that temple. And you'll remember that, and we see it here, we have a mention of the poles. The cherubim shielded the ark and its poles from above. The ark always had these poles in loops on the side, which is what is used to carry them. It's picked up, it's held on the shoulders of the people that's carrying that ark. So, and that original ark built in Moses's time, of course, was meant to be transportable because they're in the desert, they're wandering for 40 years, and every time they move, they pick up the ark and they carry it to the next stop. And that ark comes to rest in the tabernacle in Shiloh, where it is for almost 400 years, but it still has its poles. Then it goes to the various places, the Philistines, etc., comes back, sits in Kiryat Yarim, and then is brought back with its poles. Although, if you recall, it was put on a wagon at some point, and that wasn't good. But look here what happens next on verse 8. The poles projected so that the ends of the poles were visible in the sanctuary in front of the shrine, but they could not be seen and outside, and there they remain to this day. Here, it's not the original poles. The poles are extended. The poles are extended so they actually go, the ends of the poles go from one end of the room to the other. Okay? So in a way, I don't think they're affixed to the walls, but the poles are extended to go the whole length of the room. And they're visible in the sanctuary, okay? But and there they remain to this day, which is very interesting. They create a situation where on the one hand, the poles which were used to transport the ark remain, but number one, they're extended to become almost permanent fixtures, and it makes it very clear, the verse, that there they remain to this day. So even though now the ark is permanently placed in the Holy of Holies, in the permanent temple, for whatever reason, it still has these poles. And maybe to remind us of, or to connect it to the original ark. And it is very important that we connect this whole structure to the original ark. And we see that in verse 9. There was nothing inside the ark but the 2 tablets of stone, which Moses placed there at Horeb. Horeb is another word for Sinai. Okay, so this word makes it very clear. It's the original ark, and in it is the original tablets, which Moses himself placed when he got them at Sinai, when the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after the departure from the land of Egypt. I think here it's very clear that this bringing ark to its permanent place, on the one hand, is something very new, but on the other hand, the idea of continuity. This is the same tablets. These are the 10 commandments. This is the same ark. From Moses' time to Solomon's time, there is an uninterrupted tradition. And it's not just about the physical situation. It is about tradition. It is about the actual covenant. It is the 10 commandments and the whole Bible that is given to Moses, through Moses, to the nation of Israel. That is the same thing that is now in Solomon's time. And of course, this idea of a tradition begun with Revelation and Sinai, carried on to this day, okay, is something that's very, very important in the Bible and in Jewish tradition. Okay. So,
Sondra,
yes.
I understand Aaron's rod was in there too. What happened? Was it never in there, or did it go in later, or?
It's not mentioned here.
Okay.
I have to assume that it's there. Also, a small container of the manna is in there too. So it's not mentioned here, but that doesn't mean it wasn't here. I think the important thing that's mentioned here is, although it says it's only has the 2 tablets. That's what it says in verse 9. So it's possibly those things are not there anymore. We do know that was something that we'll find out later in the book in 2 Kings, that there's a what's it called? I know it's called in Hebrew, the snake, okay? Nechushtan, the snake, when they're in the desert and they're attacked by snakes, and Moses creates this pole with like a copper snake around it, which, by the way, is the symbol of medicine in Israel. Okay, because what happened there in the desert is all the children of Israel then looked at this snaky thing, and it was a symbol of a way of looking up to the skies and praying to God, but they were looking at this symbol of the snake, and they were cured of this, the snakes went away, God made a miracle, etc. We learn in 2 Kings that is still there.
That's the symbol for the American Medical Association. It's also
really, because it is a symbol for the Israeli one. I didn't know it was
the
also the American one.
The American one too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right, because that
it was Carol says it's international. It's the oath that's sworn, isn't it? And that is it's wrapped
that's
around
amazing.
the stick.
I didn't know that. That's great. I mean, I know it's here, but I didn't know it was
it's the Hippocratic Oath, isn't it? It's a symbol of the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
Well, it's a symbol of the American, of the medical profession, because they looked up at this and were healed. And so that's why, it's become. But anyway, we do know for a fact that is mentioned much later that remained in the temple. That becomes an issue later on. We don't have a mention of the canister of the manna and of the stick of Aaron. So I don't know. Worth looking up, but it is not mentioned here. Okay.
The Philistines nicked it.
Pardon?
The Philistines nicked them.
Who knows? It could be. I don't think they got near to the ark. They did not open that ark, because wherever that ark was, weird things happened while sitting in the Philistines. So I don't think
why they gave it back
anywhere near it. Okay. Okay, now let's continue. When the priests came out of the sanctuary, for the cloud had filled the house of the Lord, and the priests were not able to remain and perform the service because of the cloud, for the presence of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then, okay, that verse 10 and 11. Now let's compare. We have a very, very similar verse at the very end of the book of Exodus, the last verses of the book of Exodus, which is when Moses completes the building of the tabernacle, and we have a very similar idea. Exodus 40, verse 34. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. When the cloud, and we'll leave it for just those 2 verses for now. It's the same kind of thing as we have here. Once the ark is in place, we have a cloud which represents the Shekhinah, or the glory of God, fills the house. It's very hard for us to understand what does that mean, because we're discussing a spiritual something that is described physically, but I don't think it's physical. Okay, I don't think we suddenly have this thick something that a priest tries to go in and he feels something. Okay, it's a spiritual presence that makes it impossible for them to go in. Okay, and we do know that in the Holy of Holies, that is a place where nobody goes except on the Day of Atonement. Once a year, the high priest only goes in. No other time do people go in. So there is this idea of the presence of the Lord filling the Holy of Holies and making it impossible for anyone to enter. Okay, and we have it here and we have it there. But the difference is in the continuation of Exodus 40, we have a description about what happens with this cloud. At that point, when the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their journeys. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. So the cloud, during the time of the tabernacle in the desert, the cloud was not just a representation of God's presence in the tabernacle. It also was a signal to the nation when they would travel. And again, we see the same thing happening between the tabernacle, the original ark, the original tabernacle, and this temple. But again, what's missing here? This idea of travel, because travel is over. Okay, even the tabernacle at Shiloh, which was a permanent building. Okay, it wasn't a tent the way it was in the desert. It was a permanent building, and it was there for almost 400 years. Okay, but still, that was destroyed, and that was not permanent. And we know throughout that God has said he's going to establish his name on a particular place, and that place is only Jerusalem. And that designation we only saw at the very end of the book of Samuel. Okay, so we're now in a whole different ballgame. We have permanence for the first time, and Jerusalem, of course, at this time, we talk about Jerusalem being the eternal capital of Israel, but it's not a political capital. It is also a political capital, but from the beginning, it is a spiritual center. And it's not just a spiritual center of Israel, it is a spiritual center of the entire world. Okay, and now we have Solomon. After this has happened, Solomon now is going to respond, and that is in verse 12. So let's first read verse 12 through 21. This is its own unit. Then the whole congregation of Israel standing, the king faced about and blessed the whole congregation of Israel. He said, "Praise be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has fulfilled with deeds the promise he made to my father David. For he said, ever since I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city among all the tribes of Israel for building a house where my name might abide, but I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. Now my father David had intended to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, as regards your intention to build a house for my name, you did right to have that intention. However, you shall not build the house yourself. Instead, your son, the issue of your loins, shall build the house for my name. And the Lord has fulfilled the promise that he made. I have succeeded my father David and have ascended the throne of Israel as the Lord promised. I have built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. And I have set a place there for the ark containing the covenant which the Lord made with our fathers when he brought them out from the land of Egypt. So here in this section, we have Solomon offering thanksgiving. He's talking he gathers the nation of Israel, but he's actually, in a way, he's addressing the nation, blessing God and thanking God as he's addressing the nation. And there's a couple of things here worth pointing out. So first of all, he emphasizes here the fact that it is a fulfillment of a promise. He refers back to God's promise to David. And there's two parts of that promise. One, that David and his descendants will be the dynasty that rules Israel. And he talks about that it is not David who will build the temple, but it is Solomon. And Solomon is standing here and thanking God for fulfilling his promise to David. Solomon, is the heir to David. And he, of course, he's looking forward to a continuation of his dynasty, but also he has built this house. Now, this, on the one hand, you can see it as a purely spiritual, religious kind of expression. Thank you, God, for fulfilling your promise. But I think there's also a political undertone here that you can't deny, because Solomon, every king, okay, now we're used to democracies. We're used to democracies where every number of years, the citizens go to the polls and they elect their leader. And that is an opportunity for the leader to gain or regain the confidence of the nation. And there are places where there's limits to the number of terms a leader can have, and there are places that there isn't. Of course, there's age, and then people retire and people die. And, so sometimes you're electing a new leader and sometimes you're re-electing the leader you have had. But in a democracy, there is a very clear way for the people themselves to express the fact, yes, they want this leader, okay? In a monarchy, you don't have that ability. And of course, in the case of Solomon and the case of David and Saul, these are monarchies that the actual leader has been chosen by God. So there's this extra appointment or whatever. But as we saw also with Saul, also with David, okay, while God's appointment is critical, it doesn't mean that there isn't also a need to gain the confidence of the nation itself. And so in a way, this is what Solomon is doing here. He is saying, I am legitimate because God promised David that his heir would rule. I built this house legitimately because God told David his son would build it. And that also, and that becomes, I think, a very important statement. And I think this is something that we also see even more in Chronicles. The way the story is told in Chronicles, it is much clearer. The fact that God's promise to David was not just that his son, but that his son Solomon would build the temple. And I think this is one of the things we discussed when we talked about the differences between the way it's told in Chronicles and the way it's told in 2 Samuel, is that in Chronicles, it's a different period of time. It's Second Temple period when this is written, where the idea of justifying the house of David is that much more important, okay? Where here, we're in the beginnings of the house of David. We're number 2 in the house of David. And so this, of course, is also very, very important. Now, okay, now let's see. Okay, now he goes on, and he talks about, one second, where am I here? Yeah, okay. Where am I? Yeah, okay. Oh, one more thing I want to point out, very, very important. In verse 16, we have here, ever since I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city among all the tribes of Israel for building a house, but I've chosen David to rule my people. Solomon is essentially quoting what God said to David. Let's go back and see what God actually said to David at this story we're referring to. So this is 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 6 through 17. We're not going to read the whole thing now. I mean, you go over it at some point. Very, very important. But there's couple things I want to point out. Look at verse 6. Okay, 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 6. Again, this is God speaking through Nathan to David, where he's telling him, you're not the one who's going to build the temple, but your son will. From the day that I brought the people of Israel out of Egypt to this day, I have not dwelt in a house, but have moved about in tent and tabernacle. As I moved about wherever the Israelites went, did I ever reproach any of the tribal leaders whom I appointed to care for my people Israel? Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Okay, so it's a very similar statement here than what Solomon is quoting. He says, ever since I brought my people out of Israel, I have not chosen a city among all other tribes of Israel for building a house where my name might abide. Okay, so what's a big difference? In 2 Samuel, he talks about, I have not dwelt in a house, but instead was in a tent or tabernacle, number 1. And number 2, it says in verse 7, did I ever reproach any of the tribal leaders whom I appointed to care for my people of Israel. You have a sense here, okay, that on the one hand, there's this comparison between the permanent temple and a tent, but you also have a comparison between talking about the various tribes of Israel, or the tribes, okay? Here we talk about, I have not chosen a city among all the tribes of Israel. This idea of the tribes of Israel is focused on, but not as the tribal leaders, but as a tribal location, okay? And I think this reflects a change, what Solomon is communicating, as opposed to what the conversation we got in David was originally, okay? The original conversation focused on the fact that God basically saying, you know what? I've been in a tent all these years. I can be in a tent a little bit longer, okay? And I never really went to any of the leaders and said, why aren't you building me a house? Here we have, the difference of the temple is not so much versus the tent, but of a permanent place. Now we have a city, we have a permanent place. Okay, now it's very interesting that where is that place? The place of the Temple Mount itself is the border. The border of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin go right through the Temple Mount. And in fact, what we have now, we have also in the United States, also in Australia, the United States was first, okay? We have this concept of a national capital being on the border between two states. You have the District of Columbia that's carved out of Virginia and Maryland. And in Australia, you have the Australian Capital Territory that's carved out of Victoria and New South Wales. So it's very similar ideas. Why? You have an ancient, it becomes from ancient Israel. Ancient Israel is a place of many tribes. You want to make sure everybody is together. But so it's very important not to place this central temple in any one tribe's territory. It needs to belong to everybody. So here we have, I didn't select a city among all the tribes of Israel. A city, and what really happens, it becomes a city between the tribes of Israel. And I think it's very significant that it's between Judah and Benjamin, because it's the Judah and Benjamin tribes that at this point, until Solomon's time, is the main fault line. Saul was the first king of Israel. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. David is the next king of Israel. He's from the tribe of Judah. And there is tension between those two tribes and between the house of Saul and the house of David, almost to the end of David's life. By placing the temple in the middle between those two tribes, you are essentially binding those two tribes and trying to erase a fault line that is there. And indeed, it works, because later on, when the kingdom does split again, after Solomon's death, it does split again. Benjamin and Judah stay together. It's all the other ones that are separate. So you see that here as he talks about the changes he made, again, is focusing on the place as opposed to the tent or the various leaders. Okay. Okay, let me just see. Okay, now we are not going to be able to go further into, let's just finish. Let's just finish the next. Okay, let's talk about just the beginning of the next section. And that's 22. Starting in verse 22, we have essentially a prayer. Solomon's prayer, unlike his speech and his blessing, his thanking of God, beginning in verse 22, we have a prayer, 22 through 53. It is the longest prayer listed in the Bible. Okay, and I just want to read the beginning of it, because the beginning stands as a sort of introduction, etc. Okay, then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in the presence of the whole community of Israel. He spread the palms of his hands toward heaven and said, O Lord God of Israel, in the heavens above and on the earth below, there is no God like you, who keep your gracious covenant with your servants when they walk before you in wholehearted devotion. You who have kept the promises you made to your servant, my father David, fulfilling with deeds the promise you made, as is now the case. And now, O Lord God of Israel, keep the further promise that you made to your servant, my father David. Your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. If only your descendants will look to their way and walk before me as you have walked before me. Now, therefore, O God of Israel, let the promise that you made to your servant, my father David, be fulfilled. So this is an introduction, but again, it harkens back to what he has just before, the blessing and the thanking of God. Now he's asking God to continue to keep your word, okay? Stay with me, fulfill the promise to David of protecting me, that his house will be fulfilled, and that we will walk in devotion with you. And that is a very, a kind of introduction to the prayer. The prayer itself begins on 27, verse 27. So we will take up with verse 27 next week. Any questions?
Little question. The cherubim, it was part of the ark on the top of the box, yes. And in addition, there were the extra cherubim.
That's right. That's right. The huge ones, totally different proportion, looking slightly different. Okay. They're standing. I mean, I've seen pictures of this, very, let me see if I even have a picture that I have available to show. Let me see. No, I don't have that picture. I had seen it and I know I had, oh wait, here it is. Here it is. Here it is. I'm going to share this picture. 1 second. Let's see if I'm able to do this. Okay, you see that?
Oh, yeah.
So you see these cherubims, they look different too. Well, maybe just because they're bigger. Okay, but they span the entire width of the room with the ark in between, and you can see these poles going from one end to the other end.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's clear. Thank you.
Just one little point. The third occurrence of this idea of the glory filling the house is in Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 5. The glory of the Lord filled the house. So
Yeah, this week, see this in different places. Okay. Now, what we're going to open with next week, okay, verse 27, okay, is a very, very interesting verse because it deals with this whole idea of, can the temple contain God? What does that mean? God's presence in the temple. Okay. So we will touch on that a little bit more when we start next week with verse 27. It's how he opens the prayer. The prayer part of this whole thing. Well, he started the prayer already, by praising God, but then gets into the nuts and bolts of the prayer with verse 27. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, well, it's good to see you all, and hopefully we will reconnect again next week, same time. Have a good week, everybody.